Let's start with a fun little story, though. Shout out to my Australian brethren here, Taran Armstrong. The Golden State Warriors are signing Taran Armstrong to a two-way contract. Taran Armstrong played with Cairns Taipans. My God, I went full American there.
I'm pretty sure that's how I would have said it if you would have asked me to say it. What is going on here? I'm wearing off on you in a very negative way. This isn't good, Sam.
It's early, Bryce. The Cairns Taipans. Taran Armstrong this year averaged 17 points per game, shooting 46, 35, 70, 4.6 rebounds, 4.7 assists per game, reduced the turnover number down to like 2.6 per game as well. Was just really good. Like just a really, really solid basketball player this year. And I really think that this is a well-deserved two-way. I think that he's earned this opportunity. He was a guy that was draft eligible last year. Didn't have a great pre-draft year. His first year in Australia, started at Cal Baptist. I loved his freshman year. He was like the best freshman in that league, which I believe was the WAC that year that he was in it. I don't even remember where Cal Baptist is now, but really, really awesome feel for the game. Incredible, like passer, playmaker out of ball screens. But the issue, really in the 3 years leading up to this year was that he had no way to keep defenses honest as a scorer. He now has a way to keep defenses honest as a scorer. He has a bit of a pull-up jump shot now that makes him capable, at least, of keeping defenses honest in that way. Big guard, 6'5", and seriously, like if you go see some of the Santa Cruz games that I'm sure he'll be playing in the rest of the year, like you're going to see an awesome dynamic ball screen passer who, reads the second and third level of the defense in a truly, truly fantastic elite way.
We've talked about these guys before, right? Like bringing in a guy that just can run your G League team and the value of having that type of player if you're trying to develop certain play finishers, whether it's a big, whether it's a wing, whatever, and having a guy like Taran that can come in and do that. It's funny you bring up the scoring in the mid-range. I was revisiting my notes when this came up on him, and I had one where insane dribble move to leave the defender in the dust, rises up for what should be a wide open 12-foot mid-range jumper, but he decides he wants to pass and he turned it over. Now that was from a couple years ago. That's notes from his first year in the NBL. And so it shows, okay, this was a flaw at one point and now it's something he's improved on, but can really, really pass the ball, can really map out the court and figure those things out. He can operate a ball screen. He has eye manipulation, all of that stuff, jails defenders, all of the nuance in the ball screen. And as you mentioned, a bigger guard. And I also, like, again, going through my notes, I was like, oh, okay, nice off-ball cuts and some stuff like that. So if he does end up having to play with the Golden State Warriors, maybe just this off-ball, his off-ball cutting and moving and processing can play, and a good rebounder for a guard as well. I know people, wherever your value lands on that, that is something that he does well for a guard also.
Yeah, totally agree. Completely agree with you. He's a really smart basketball player. That's like the easiest way to define Taran. I talked to Taran when he was like 19 years old in his first year at Cal Baptist. And I think he's like one of the smartest guards I've ever talked to at that age. Like I haven't like kept up with Taran, like in terms of like, communicating with him personally, but like, I'd assume that hasn't gone away. You know what I mean? He is a really, really highly intelligent human being who is seeing things on the court a little bit before others see them. Really impressive player, really impressive dude. And I'm excited that he's going to get a shot in Golden State because I think the scheme is probably right for him. Even though they don't run like crazy ball screens necessarily, the way that they utilize their players on the court, I think he can be effective within that scheme.
That was my only thing, was a scheme that's not super heavy ball screen. Is he able to figure out ways to break down the defense, whether in isolation or with movement or cutting or whatever? He just seems like a processor and a guy that can figure that stuff out, even though I do think ball screen nuance and usage is a strength of his game.
So this takes us into what the meat of this episode is going to be.
Yeah.
Because we talk about guys who fit with Golden State, right? And I feel like there was like a weird split among people when Jimmy Butler got traded to the Golden State Warriors. Some people looked at the concern of what Jimmy's lack of shooting could bring to that scheme. Whereas I think you and I, when we talked about it, we were really excited about this deal for Golden State because we liked the idea of, oh no, it doesn't really matter that Jimmy can't shoot. He's a guy that you have to be cognizant of all the time because he is so smart and so good with his body and so good with his off-ball movement that he's going to fit perfectly within that scheme. I think that he might be able to get 15 points a game with the Warriors just by like sealing guys high away from the rim and like using his body and using the way that defenses play him in order to score that way. And like getting like little offensive rebound putbacks, getting garbage like cuts and like little garbage baskets around the rim. That's always what's made Jimmy such an effective player. It's not that he's this insane shot creator. He is like, or was, let's say, like back in the prime when he was with the Miami Heat and when he was with Philly and when he's with Minnesota for that year and like later on in his time in Chicago, right? Yes, he was a great shot creator. But to me, it was always, he's like the best guy in the NBA at being like a garbage scorer in some ways and like getting into the dirty spots of the court and being willing to like fight and scratch and claw for buckets that way. And that's what the Warriors needed. Like they needed somebody who could be a secondary playmaker, which Jimmy can absolutely be that. He can be a secondary ball handler, let Steph play off the ball more often. But when he is forced to play off the ball because Steph has the ball in his hands, he's really smart and sharp at being utilized in that way too. So the Jimmy deal is one that I always really liked for the Warriors. And early on, I think that's kind of what we're seeing for Golden State. I think Steve Kerr just had like an immediate game plan on how to utilize him.
So I wasn't down on the move. I was a little bit more in the middle of, is this going to work or not? And I want to build off one thing with what you're talking about. And then I do want to get into like specific actions that I watched them run in their game versus the Bucks that I found really interesting and where this all really started to make sense. Do you know what the Golden State Warriors are on the season in free throw rates?
I would guess quite low.
Bottom 5, Sam. They are bottom 5 in free throw rate. If you just want straight free throw attempts, they were 24th. In the 5 games with Jimmy Butler, you want to guess where they rank in free throw attempts? You're muted.
I would say like top 10.
Top 10. They are 9th.
Yeah.
Jimmy Butler is averaging almost 9.5 free throw attempts per game.
Yeah.
This is something this team did not do well. Steph Curry, less than 4 attempts. They traded Andrew Wiggins in that trade. He was second on the team before Jimmy Butler at 4.2. Their best free throw attempt guy is Jonathan Kuminga. And we've talked about like, what is his role? Where does he fit in? He's only played 32 games this year as well. Jimmy Butler helps in an area that is a very efficient shot attempt in the National Basketball Association, which is getting to the free throw line. But what I thought was awesome, Sam, watch this game against the Bucks. First action of the game, guess what they do? Put the ball in Jimmy Butler's hands, run Curry off ball action, and it works. First action of the second half, now they switch it up. They put the ball in Draymond's hands, and they run Curry off the ball action. But guess who sets the screens for Steph Curry? Jimmy Butler. And that puts the defense in a really tough spot when Jimmy Butler is the guy setting a screen for Steph Curry. So that stuff is really, really interesting because he can cut off the ball and he can attack closeouts, but they can also use him to initiate offense when they want to let Steph do all of his stuff running off screens and those type of things. It really is a better offensive fit than what I think I even envisioned.
Yeah, and like we talked about this like immediately when it happened. Like the Warriors love to run their like split actions, right? Where, you're going to have somebody in the post. They typically have that be Draymond, where he's on the block and he's either making a decision to hit the cutter going toward the middle of the basket, coming down the lane, stampeding, or hitting the back screened player, coming around for the 3-pointer, onto the same side as the post player. And what Jimmy does is he gives you so much flexibility in how you get to those options and avenues as a player. You can have Jimmy be the post player. You can have Draymond be the post player there who takes that entry pass. You can have either of them be the passer hitting that cutter because they're both excellent passers. You can have either of them being the screener, going into the cut to get Steph free and then stampede to the rim after they cut. Like there are just a lot of different ways that you can utilize this. I think that ultimately what this did and what this move did and why I was so excited about it is that it makes them a much more flexible, difficult offense for teams to predict more than anything. Before, if Steph didn't have the ball and if Steph wasn't like primarily initiating what was happening, it was very difficult for the Golden State Warriors to get anything efficiently. And part of this is, by the way, too, we mentioned this on what was it last week's show, that like Brandon Pajemski has started to come around.
Yeah.
He was starting to come around before Jimmy got there. I think that is worth noting. He sat out those games after his abdominal injury, and I think that kind of reset some things for him. Maybe he got healthier after this, but he had started to come around a little bit before that. But Pods is starting to look more like the player that we saw last season, as opposed to the guy we saw in the first half of this season, where he looked quite poor early in the season. We can just be honest about that. Yep. But being that now third option, let's say, being sometimes even the fourth option, where he can just take advantage of opportunities that are created for him, that makes his life easier, and he's now having an easier time playing within these lineups. I love their starting lineup construction right now. It's so fun. It's so smart. They have Moses Moody, who's just happy to be like a fifth option out there, knock down shots. Oh, by the way, they signed him for like a $13 million per year deal at the extension window this past year. That deal, I think, to me looks really, really sharp right now because he is a perfect fit within what this is now. Pajemski, I think, is like a perfect fit as like your third ball handler out there who is taking advantage of the advantages that are created for him by Steph, by Draymond being able to make passing reads, by Jimmy Butler being out there as like the real secondary creator. At the end of the day, they got Jimmy Butler basically for Andrew Wiggins and a first-round pick. They basically got like, I don't know if Jimmy's a top 12 player anymore. I would probably argue that he's not at the end of the day. But they definitely got a top 30 player in the league. They definitely got like a top, I don't know, like top 25-ish player in the league, let's call it, for Andrew Wiggins and a first-round pick. Like the price was just not high enough to worry about taking this risk, I think, whenever I really loved the fit within the offense ahead of time. And he fits the exact flaw that they desperately needed to fill, which was going to get a secondary creator for Stephen Curry.
Moody over his last 8 games where he has consistently, there was one game he was inactive here, but these are 8 straight games with 23 or more minutes, 14 points on 47, 38 with 6 attempts from 3 in these games, 71. Like I am glad to see him consistently in the rotation, getting those minutes. I think the other thing this gives them that they haven't really had, right, is they can play through somebody that makes sense when Steph Curry's not on the floor. With all due respect to the greatness of Klay Thompson, he's just not that type of player anymore. Even as an off the ball player, like he just doesn't. I know he can get on heaters. I know those things, but Jimmy, if you're trying to run the offense through a player, is a better option for that. Now it's a little bit different, right? Like it's a little bit ISO. Let's throw it into like these post ups and some of that stuff. But it is impactful when the game slows down in the playoffs, when Steph is off the floor, you have a go-to guy. So it's not just the second guy on the floor with Steph and these creative things you can do to pressure the defense. It's in the 18 non-minutes, the 15 non-Steph minutes in the playoffs, where you can stagger those so Jimmy's on the floor and you feel like you can win or at least play even in those minutes now because you have a real offensive initiator, whether it's simply him getting to the free throw line, knocks down a couple mid-range jumpers, whatever it is. That's an option they didn't have because the option was Kuminga. And no matter what we want to talk about, like that's a bigger conversation. It didn't seem like they trusted him to do that. And I think everybody would agree.
And I wouldn't either.
Yeah.
For what it's worth.
And for what it's worth, like Jimmy, there's no argument that Jimmy Butler right now is the better option to do that, right? Like we can have the long-term Kuminga conversation in the offseason some other time.
Well, no, I actually want to have the Kuminga conversation right now.
I mean, I did put in my notes, I said, where does this leave Kuminga though? Like, where is his role on this team now, Sam?
Well, I think the role is very obvious, and I'm interested to see how interested and happy he will be with this, I think is my question, because he is obviously in a contract year, but Kuminga's obviously missed like a month or so now with this ankle injury, right? I guess almost 2 months now. Jeez.
His last game was January 5th was his last. Well, he played on January 4th was his last game.
So the very obvious answer here is to bring him off the bench.
100%. Yeah.
Be like your bench, playmaker, play him with, Jimmy, Buddy Hield, and Kuminga is like the idea. And then when Draymond comes off the court, potentially you can put him in and play him with Jimmy and Steph at times, right? Like that. There are ways that you can stagger this, but I don't think that you start him and I don't think you close with him with both Jimmy and Draymond on the court. And I think that could be frustrating for him. I mean, he's averaging 17 points a game. I think that, he's obviously, again, in a contract year. So I would understand any degree of annoyance that he has with that. And it seems like the Warriors are committed to him. And I hope that he is willing to get that. But also, I don't know if the long-term fit for Kuminga is now in Golden State necessarily with the Jimmy addition. And they do need to kind of figure that out with some trial and error this summer or this spring. But at the same token, if you think it's not going to work in the way that I think it probably won't work, it's hard for them because they're behind the 8 ball in terms of the standings. They need to win as many games as possible to try and get into the playoffs. It's hard. They're in like a weird position with Kuminga that they have to kind of work through. And the answer to me is just bring him off the bench and play. I just hope that, I hope he's good with that. And like, it's not going to be a problem with him.
I agree. Bring him off the bench. I guess my bigger thing was I don't even love him and Jimmy on the floor together, like as your second unit. You're like, I feel like they could contrast in what they want to do, or maybe not. Maybe it's too much similar. And in that way, I don't think it's going to have a lot of chemistry. Maybe that's the better word I should use is I think that's how it's not going to work well. I'm interested to see maybe in those minutes, it is less kind of the warrior-y ball movement off me, whatever. And it's a little more half court isolation and a little bit of your turn, my turn between Jimmy and Kuminga. I don't know. I like Jonathan Kuminga, but I admit that like his style is very unique and I don't know that it fits Golden State style. And I don't know that it fits playing on the floor with Jimmy, where when you're staggering Jimmy and Steph, you kind of want to run your offense through Jimmy. So it will be interesting how they acclimate that and put it all together. And to your point with the standings, they're 9th right now. They're 2.5 out of 6, which is the Clippers. They're 2 up on the Suns, which is 11th. So
for what it's worth, they are about to gain like a half game.
They're about to win, right? Over the
because
Mavs.
they're up like 30 on the Mavs. Like they're just kicking the shit out of them.
So
they're actually going to like come close to tying the Mavs here. I think they'll get within half of a game.
Yes, that is. Yep. Half of a game of the Mavs for 8th. They would still be one game
behind
back
the
Wolves. And if you look at their last 5 games, so that is before the game on Sunday, those are the games Jimmy has played. They're 5th in the NBA in net rating. And if they're kicking the crap out of the Mavs right now, that net rating is only going to go up. So they're going to be 5-1. a net rating probably around 15. So far, the returns look pretty solid for that move.
So my two questions here. One or two points really. One is a question, one is a point. One, they have among Western Conference teams the second easiest schedule remaining. It's them in Minnesota. The Warriors have a game against the Pelicans, two against the Hornets, a game against the Raptors, a game against the Sixers, a game against the Nets, and two against Portland, although that Portland game obviously looks like it could be somewhat more difficult than what people think. Minnesota has 5 against New Orleans and Utah, 2 against the Sixers, 1 against the Hornets, 2 against Brooklyn left.
Oh, wow.
So Minnesota's schedule eases up. I think that like Minnesota, it's really just going to depend on like how the Warriors play versus Minnesota, right? I think I would probably take the Warriors over Minnesota, but they're close enough in terms of schedule where I feel okay about it.
Yeah, and that's just Houston, to get to 7.
Yeah, Houston also has the third easiest schedule among Western Conference teams remaining. The Clippers have a fairly difficult schedule. The Lakers have like a crazy schedule. Like they have 2 against OKC, 1 against Boston, 1 against Memphis, 2 against Denver, 1 against the Knicks, 2 against Houston. So like, I think the Lakers look great. We're going to talk about them in a second too. But that could be interesting. Phoenix, by the way, for things I know Phoenix fans don't need to, have more shit piled on this situation. But Phoenix has the most difficult schedule remaining in the league right now.
Of course they do.
Because of course they do. But the Clippers also have like quite a difficult schedule. I think if you made me guess right now, I think the Warriors end up in the 6.
Interesting. Okay.
And here's what I would also say. If they are able to make the playoffs and don't have to go through this play-in gauntlet or anything like that, and if they're able to avoid the 8, realistically, because that's the spot you want to avoid. I think that when we did like post-trade deadline contender rankings, I had the Warriors way too low. I had them like in that like 9 to 13 bucket. They're way better than this. I might have them 3rd in the West right now.
Between OKC and the Nuggets or OKC and the Lakers?
OKC and the Nuggets. And I would have the Lakers and the Warriors. Like 3-4. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't hate that. I'm interested to see how it looks. I'm a little curious about their big man position and how that's going to look. But this looks right now, the early returns are exactly what you would want to see. And this is exactly what we talked about. Again, they did not win as many games as I thought they were going to with their like 12-man depth. This is all, they're just going to have the depth to win regular season games. And because of that, I think 6 is probably about as high as they're going to get. They're 5.5 back of the Rockets, who I know have been struggling recently. That would still be a lot to get there. But yeah, I mean, if they can stay out of the 8s, they're interesting to make a run after that. So I think, yeah, I don't think I disagree with that. I think I would have OKC, Denver. I know we're about to talk about the Lakers. By the way, I love the Clippers. I don't know why. I can't not love them. I love that team for some reason.
No, I do too. They're a really like tough, fun team.
Even Ben Simmons and Bogdanovich in the second unit were just like making me smile the other day. Like they already had this like weird chemistry that I was like, this is awesome. But yeah, Golden State looks like a really, really good team. I think an X factor is what we talked about earlier, though. What does Jonathan Kuminga bring them? Like, does he come in and find his little role, and does it fit well? Does it not? And if it doesn't, then what do they do with that? So I think there's a little bit of an X factor with him.
Yeah. I think that like my next tier of contender ranking, I'd have like OKC above everybody else because of course, like they have to be above everybody else. and this is purely in the West. We'll talk about the East maybe at a later date, but purely in the West, I think it's like the Nuggets, Warriors, and Lakers in a tier for me. That's where I'm at. Like, I think that those three look like the best of the group right now.
Sure. Yeah.